next we have Beles.
I guess I could have just kept my camera on in that case.
No problem. They go on and off.
Just give me a second to bring the notes up. Okay, so is everyone able to see that?
All right, it's still loading. Give it a sec. Yes, we can now see your screen.
Oops, sorry. Awesome. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Beles Lezina. I'm going to be speaking on my work terms with Indigenous Services Canada, which I will be referring to as ISC, and Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, which I will be referring to as CERNAC. So before we jump in, of course, considering the subject matter, I will be throwing up a land acknowledgement. I'm giving this presentation from Ottawa, but I did complete my work terms from Toronto and the surrounding GTA area. So I think it is important for us to acknowledge the land, of course, and it should be a common practice in spaces like this as a good starting point towards reconciliation and not only show gratitude, but also acknowledge Indigenous peoples and the land that we live on, and colonialism as an ongoing process. So I'm also going to be giving a trigger warning as well. I'm going to be discussing the unmarked graves that were found over the last few months across Canada. So just letting you all know, but I'll be giving another warning before going to that section of my presentation. So I have a timeline of events. I completed 2 back-to-back work terms with the same team starting at the beginning of May. The summer work term ended in August, same as everyone else, and then started back up from September to December. The interview process went well. It was over the phone, which was great. I also did have some kind of knowledge, like background knowledge on Indigenous rights and issues in Canada from my undergraduate degree. And so I think that really did help me as well, and also encouraged me to want to apply for this opportunity as well, just to kind of advocate alongside Indigenous communities and my colleagues who were Indigenous backgrounds as well from the inside. So I completed the work terms as a communications assistant. I have a little bit of a breakdown on the screen of how, where in the branch I was placed. I was under the strategic communications team, working with the resolutions and partnership sector. Technically, I was under ISC, the communications branch is under ISC, but we do service both ISC and CERNAC, so that is why I'll be talking about both of the departments. And they were originally called the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada department, but they split into the two in 2017. And I worked on a team of 6 to 7 people. There was some I guess, movement within the team. So, but it was under 7 people at all times. And I had 1 manager who I'll be speaking about more later on in my presentation. So starting off my work term, most of my duties did deal with approvals, which I'm sure a lot of us did had to take care of during our terms. I started out by getting approvals on a variety of communication products, mostly news releases and media lines, but then expanded into other parts as well. And this does seem kind of like very much work that you would give to an intern or a co-op student, but I do think it was a great way for me to understand the inner workings of the organization and understand everyone's role, because I am essentially pestering them to get things approved quickly, especially when given a strict deadline. And then I also became very familiar with products and the language used in communication products this way, and common edits that were made throughout the process as well. So eventually, especially towards the end of my summer term and more in my fall term, I was able to draft actual communications products and start up the first, like a rough copy of all of them. So I started off with social media content, of course, seems like the easiest since we are already on there, but eventually did expand out to news releases, media lines, communication considerations for internal purposes, and some media responses as well to public inquiries. Also primarily worked with the specific claims branch. So spec claims are agreements between the Government of Canada and Indigenous communities regarding land and other assets that once belonged to the community but was historically acquired by the government unlawfully. And so communities will put in a request for the government to, or for the court to look at the case behind, or the situation behind the whatever like they acquired. And so whenever an agreement was made, we would create news releases and media lines just revolving around that realm. Going into my reflection, I'll give my trigger warning now. I'm going to jump into the discussion on the unmarked graves that were found across Canada on former residential school sites. So for those of you who do not know, there were graves that were identified at former residential schools across Canada, starting at the end of May, I believe, with Kamloops, British Columbia, which found 200 remains. The remains are presumed to be students that attended residential schools. And if you include the most recent locating at Williams Lake in BC, the number has reached I believe over 1,900, but it is estimated that at least 4,000 students had died while attending residential schools. This was hard to hear, obviously, just as a person, it's really difficult, but it was hard to be working directly with this case, especially because a lot of us did come from, I guess, like social justice and advocacy backgrounds. And so in a way, it felt almost like it was hard to like work directly with all the information that we were being provided with, for sure. We had been taught this in undergrad, of course, that this was known amongst Indigenous communities, and so the locatings that happened over the last few months was really just like confirming what was already known by these communities. This is the reason why terms like findings and discoveries aren't usually used, and you would see that reflected in communications products that were released by the government if you look close enough. So on top of already being fed all this information that was really difficult to hear, the government was also facing a lot of criticism on social media, which added to that kind of internal conflict that a lot of us were facing within the department. And on top of that, the workload had grown exponentially at this point. So there was an influx of media inquiries from around the world. There was a task force put together that I ended up working very closely with that was dedicated to addressing residential school sites and the remains that were found on the grounds. And so at this time, we really pushed announcements, statements from the ministers, news releases, and more regarding funding for Indigenous communities to either start the search for potential remains, continue their search, or honor those who had died and who had been found. It is upsetting that it was under these circumstances that I had to work under, but I did end up learning a lot. Unfortunately, the situation was less than ideal, of course, especially focusing on how governments communicate during times of crises, because there was a point where this was essentially, I guess, a source of like a national crisis at the time. And I was able to participate closer in the drafting process of communication products pretty early on, because at this point it had only been about 3 weeks into my first work term. And so the heavy workload did continue into August, but eventually by August there had been rumors of an election kind of moving around. And so we had been working extra hard at that point. Again, the work picked up again to rush and put out news releases and announcements before we entered the caretaker period. So eventually, the Governor General Mary Simon dissolved Parliament, triggered an election during which public servants, including myself, would observe the caretaker convention or the caretaker period. Essentially, ministries would stop operating unless critical information needed to be shared with the public regarding things like health and safety. Internal communications was still running, but that wasn't the responsibility of our team. So the rest of the branch had been paused. You can see there are more don'ts than do's in terms of tasking on the screen. So the work did kind of dry up at that point, which was, I mean, a welcome change considering the past few months I had had. And this would last past election day until a prime minister was sworn in, and cabinet ministers were selected. So looking at my time overall, putting the work aside, I had a great time with ISC and CERNAC. I only have great things to say about my team and the people I had worked with, including my manager. Everyone that I was surrounded with, I felt had definitely made sure that my goals for the term were not only met, but also actively encouraged me to pursue other tasks and things like that around the department as well. So I'm really fortunate for that, including my manager. Like I said, I will be singing her praises for a very long time. A lot of the work that we are learning in communications management now, I think, can definitely relate to my experience with her. And I think that it really helped me better understand the importance of representation on a managerial level. It's very rare for me to encounter other women of color in high positions. So I think that was I'm really grateful for that experience for sure. Also taught me the importance of having good management versus great management versus good management. And also what you would want to see in a communications manager, in terms of that support when it comes to handling mental health during a stressful time, not only with one-on-one with the team, but also together, and make sure we're having an open dialogue constantly over the next few weeks following the busy months we had in the summer. And I will also point out that there were many connections to the risk and crisis management course risk and crisis communications course that I had taken the term before. So I think it was a great tie-in, I guess, to that course as well. I'm fortunate to also be continuing my work with ISC now with the internal communications team. Glad it was after the elections because I heard they had a busy time while the rest of us were enjoying slower work days. But I did end up falling in love with strategic communications and really finding myself being drawn to the work that we had done there. So I do hope to return to that sector for sure, even if it's not with the same team or employers or a department. I believe this concludes my presentation. If there are questions, I can take them now. Otherwise, thank you all for listening. Yeah, we can jump into that portion now.
Thank you for another great presentation. Yes, are there questions, comments, des questions ou des commentaires? Don't be shy, we have plenty of time. Donc, des questions, des commentaires, either for Beles or all of our panelists this morning. Donc, soit par rapport à cette présentation ou par question pour tous les panélistes. Jennifer?
Yes, that was a very interesting presentation, Beles. And it sounds like you had a really great co-op experience, which I think is really fantastic. It's something that I mentioned in the chat a little while ago when Diane and I were chatting about it. What I'm wondering is how your manager helped to support not only yourself, but also your colleagues when dealing with such a sensitive, you mentioned triggering. There's another word that I'm searching for that I can't quite think of right now, but something that can be very difficult to deal with in the workplace. So the subject matter working at those departments when news was being released about the residential school burials and all of those things, like how did your manager help the team, or how did the department help its employees manage this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I will say compared to other jobs I've had that were in communications, maybe in general, discussions on mental health. Of course, we are also working remotely, so that's also something to consider as well. Like there was already a basis for those discussions to be had. But I think because that basis had already been there, it was much easier for management to kind of build on that when things did get a little too tough for the rest of us. I will say my manager also did already have one-on-one meetings with us. So if there were things that we couldn't or didn't feel we wanted to express at our daily team meetings, there was also another way for us to reach out to her as well. So talks of mental health and providing mental health resources and support were really happened really. They were more prevalent during the actual like times of crisis, but as the weeks progressed, you know, like I guess talks kind of ended and work picked up and so on and so forth. But my manager did maintain. She wanted to continue these conversations like past. Once the work was done and once we've even entered that caretaker period where it's not too much going on. So I do really appreciate that. I think the fact that the conversation was a continuing process and it wasn't just something that stopped once discussion ended. Like, I think that was really beneficial for sure.
Other questions or comments? D'autres questions, commentaires? Linda.
Okay, Beles, I really enjoyed your presentation. Like I stated in the comment, I said the political climate is always an interesting place for communicators. It's always fun, and it's also a time of exposure into different activities that are going on in that space. So I want to ask you, do you see this as a career path you want to go for? Is this something you are thinking about, having had the experience through CORE? Do you see this as a career path that you can make a name for yourself and be like the great communicators we have out there in the world? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. I do actually very much so feel like this would be a better career path. Prior to my co-op terms, a lot of the work I had done was in social media and marketing and kind of that industry, and it wasn't really something I found myself very drawn to. I feel like this work term kind of showed how we can put, like I said, the theories that you learn in class together with the practical work that you do as well. I really did appreciate that. I think it was much more I don't know how to say it, but more like what you thought versus like what you know, like in terms of technicalities and like what you know about like I said, social media marketing, those kind of things. So I did appreciate the change of pace as well. I do think that this is I would want to return to that team for sure. I think StratComms is it's a great way to, like I said, bring together those two things. What you learn.
I encourage you to do more because I see you as an adventurous person. So that area of space is an area of adventure. So all you need to do is to work more on yourself. And the beauty about communication is that communication does not limit you. It makes you shatter ceilings. It makes you think wild. Makes you think of things that you can do even beyond your imagination. So I encourage you not to limit yourself, explore that space very well, and let the entire university community be proud of you. And wherever we are in the world, we'll be raising our thumbs up for you and be singing your praises. Well done.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda. That's so kind of you to say.
Are there questions or comments? Well, thank you all for very engaging presentations. Merci à toutes pour vos présentations très étayées. Je crois qu'on est un peu en avance sur l'horaire. I think we're a little bit light. So, Elisa, would you like to let us know what's next?